Sorry.
Hello, nerds. I've got Gabriel Cornejo in the nerd zone, and he is running for president in the Democratic Party. And we're going to talk a little bit about his background and then get his take on some, hot topics that are in the news these days. It's always great to see democracy in action and everybody kind of competing and throwing their hat in the ring. So, welcome to the show, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds. I love it. Well, where are you joining us from, Gabriel?
Well, presently I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada. And part of my story is I've lived in 11 cities and 2 countries. So it's a very fair question to ask. I'm all over the place sometimes.
Yeah. What other countries were you able to live in?
At one point in my life, I was engaged to a Canadian, so I got to live in beautiful British Columbia, Vancouver.
Gorgeous.
And then I spent a significant amount of time in Toronto and Ottawa.
Love it. Yeah, I spent 13 years in Seattle, so definitely nothing like the Northwest in the summer.
Yeah, I worked in Blaine, Washington, if you know where that is.
Yeah. Right across the border, or right
That's
near.
part of my story.
Yeah. Love it. So, how does one decide to run for president? How did you arrive at this decision?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. Honestly, I've had interest in being able to have an impact in the political space. But all of this stuff in my actions derived from a car accident in 2011. I'm sorry. Is there a way to turn down the feedback I'm getting?
Oh, do you have the show open in another tab by any chance? Is it playing in another tab?
No.
Oh, Tom has an echo. Okay, weird. Hold on one second. Let me do one thing and see if I can change one setting. Echo cancellation. Reduce background noise. Is this any better?
Mic check. Yes,
Hello?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Testing 1 2. Yeah,
we're good now.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So kind of just speaking about the decision to run for office, it was never to run for president of the United States, to be honest with you. The way I've envisioned my actions and everything that I've put my effort behind, all derived from this car accident in 2011. I was living in Orange County at the time. I was in charge of one of the nation's largest smart meter projects for Southern California Edison. My folks had moved back from Arizona back to San Diego, where I'm from. And I ended up spending Friday afternoon getting ready to go help them move back into our home. Unfortunately, I never made it because I was in a hit and run. So somebody hit me in my convertible. I rolled my car, had to be life-flighted to the hospital. And if you can think of what that does to one's understanding of their own mortality and what's important and what to prioritize, that's what drives me every day, is understanding we're not promised tomorrow. So from that point on, I've committed my time and effort to things that I think that would improve the human experience, because part of this life is being able to find things that are fulfilling to you. And what I've seen, especially in the political space, is in our country and the state of things as they are today, we could vastly improve. Unfortunately, I think that money in politics has corrupted this country to the point that majority of the experiences being felt across the country are just barely surviving. And I want to transition us into a state of thriving. And so that's really what the draw is. I see Biden as a weak candidate. I'm sure you're very similar minded on that way. And knowing that that's the case, just like any culture in a company, everything rots from the head down. So if you take that top of the ticket and they're getting bribed to look the other way and not producing for Americans, well, somebody has to come in who is above that and come and change the entire culture of the country.
What has been the process like for you to get on the ballot? Because I did notice that you're getting some traction, getting on the ballot in some states, and I'm wondering how has that gone in terms of ballot access and having your voice heard?
Yeah, for sure. So this is not something that I was privy to. I'm not coming from a place of experience in the political realm. So for me, this whole process has been discovery. And given my age and experience with technology, I founded a startup myself, and two actually. I decided that I was going to document all this. So like I've got social media, and I've got this how-to series because I've used how-tos in my life to show examples of how to repair things around the home, mechanics, just that type of how-tos. And I decided to turn this whole experience into a how to run for president of the United States. So the experience of getting on ballots is very, very challenging, right? The argument is always being expressed that it's 50 races, and that's wholeheartedly true because every single state through the delegate selection plan has different requirements. Some requirements are barriers held by gatekeepers. I know that you've brought up Florida as an example more recent. And so, like Marianne, like Dean Phillips, like other fellow presidential candidates, we're being denied access, either wholeheartedly getting no responses via phone calls, emails, whatever attempts we've made to reach out, or we're just flat out being denied.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about. I guess you were like everybody impacted by the Florida stuff and maybe North Carolina. Um, in a way, it's kind of surprising that the process isn't more inviting of competition, given, in the private sector, if there's a incumbent company that has like a ton of market share, like the government will usually say, hey, we want to make sure anyone can compete and there's choice.
Really, Tom? Really, do you believe that? I mean,
Well,
that's the whole reason why I'm running, is because I don't think that that parity exists, because that dynamic has changed, right? You've got money in politics, and well, when these corporations get money, let's use Trump as the example, giving tax cuts to the wealthiest among us. Well, guess what that kickback looks like back to the politicians, right? And so when they are rigging the rules and they're rigging it in favor of these monopolies, which is currently the state of what we have, is there's less and less competition. Ultimately, the same dynamic is taking place throughout this entire process, right? It's the power dynamics between the haves and the have-nots. And even in the political space, the same is true. The DNC does not want any candidates not named Biden, because they know he's a known commodity, just like Dianne Feinstein was a known commodity that they could control and manipulate. That's why they're going to ride these candidates well past their prime, because they know that that's going to keep the incumbent in control.
yeah, I mean, I think that's what I've heard from you, from Marianne. I see Dean talking about it. I saw a little bit of that last cycle with the Yang campaign. It definitely is discouraging. I mean, you could kind of imagine, like, okay, if there were like the old Republican Party, the establishment party, like I wouldn't be shocked if they did that. But for the Democratic Party, you would think like, okay, well, they should be a little bit more for the little guy and trying to encourage more openness. But it doesn't seem like you're experiencing that as a candidate.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of play out this experience. If you have power, are you going to just allow anybody to operate and threaten that power? Whether it is in the business world, whether it is as an athlete in a sports franchise, you're going to try to keep the rules so that way they're in favor of you. The same thing is happening with the DNC, right? I've got several different DNC parties from several states that I don't get callbacks from, I don't get email responses from, working through the Secretary of State. There are these obstacles put in place to give the perception like there is an opportunity for candidates to get involved, but it's all just um, a ruse. Because
Have there,
ultimately, if you have resources to deploy in the legal sector in this, which is what we're doing in Florida,
right.
that's the last bastion of being able to overcome these obstacles that are put in place. But even that process requires resources, and the narrative that gets to be spun by those that are in charge and have the eyes of the constituents gets to be, well, everything is fair. Because as far as I'm concerned, most people are not familiar with what happened in Florida and what is happening amongst the other states as well. the Democratic Party is using specifically.
Have you encountered any states where you feel like, oh, that was pretty straightforward? I was able to get access to the ballot and make my case, and are there counter examples to Florida?
Yes, yes, there definitely are, and there are even facets of the Democratic Party within Florida that have come to our side as presidential candidates because they know that voters should have the opportunity to choose their champion. And in the whole process from state to state, yes, there have been some states, and one example, New Hampshire, they just had us presidential candidates for the first presidential forum about 2 weeks ago. Um, and thankfully, there was no hassle. Like the rules were very clear, and to meet those, as long as you achieve what was in the rules, no muss, no fuss. But of course, the consequence for them is now Biden is furious at what has transpired, and he's not on the ballot. Right? It's just like that constant push and pull. Some people actually truly believe in democracy and allowing people to vote, and then those states that push back and are brazen enough, we as candidates have had an ease of getting on the ballot. But then there are the many and the larger states that have that DNC control that are preventing us from either getting on the ballot or putting obstacles where, for example, we have to get signature requirements, which requires time and resources. But Biden's campaign doesn't have to meet those because the DNC will, or the Democratic Party from those states will put him on the ballot because they'll put together these different obstacles. Either you get permission from the Democratic Party or you have to meet signature requirements. And when those present themselves, the DNC and the Democratic parties from those states will say, well, we gave you an opportunity to get on the ballot. We didn't give you our approval, but there's this other path you could have pursued. Why didn't you pursue that? Right. And then the argument for each candidate as well, if you've got 50 states and you have to get signatures for each, I'll give you an example. New York has 15,000 signatures as a requirement. That's a ton of signatures. Ohio, we just came there. I was with a fellow presidential candidate. Not only do they have signature requirements, they even make these little detailed notes where they say, you've got to get signatures from different counties, and you cannot have people from the same county on the same list that you get a signature from, because if you do, they're void. Because the counties that you establish on one document, they all have to be from that county, or you have to have different county documents, which ends up being 88 counties. Well, imagine I approach you, I say, hey, I'm Gabriel Cornejo. I'm running for president of the United States. Would you help me out? And then you say, yeah, sure, why not? And then I have to stop and say, but wait, what county are you from? And then I have to go through my little file of facts right here on hand. Oh, great, I found you, right? That's the challenges that they put in place just to make this a little bit harder.
Yeah, it's so anti-competitive. all these rules they're just almost feel like they're designed to dissuade new entrants from challenging the incumbent.
Of course, and that's of course by design, right? Because you're a threat to power, even if you are a nobody like myself, right? I'm a not known commodity and I'm not a known candidate as of right now. You are helping me reach more people, especially people that are interested in this type of stuff. But this is the obstacles that are put in place. Now imagine for those like Marianne and like Dean Phillips, who are people that the DNC already know to be cognizant of and to try to create more obstacles. It's a rough sport out here, and so not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the Biden administration is quite well known with Lena Khan going after lots of different industries, saying, hey, I want to make sure there's competition here. We don't want the incumbents to kind of have too much control. Like we might need her to look into how the Democratic Party picks its nominee.
Yeah, fair.
Let's imagine that you made it through. It's not a job that a lot of people would want, given the challenges facing the country. What would be sort of your top priorities as president?
Yeah, Yeah, so if you guys are curious at all about my policies, and really truthfully, I only put four because I find that people can get overwhelmed and disengaged, right? So gabe2024.com if you're curious. But the top four policies that I put on there, and anything that I say beyond policy number one, which is get money out of politics, and all the different terms that I've put in are kind of moot because ultimately the priorities that I think that are most important and to contextualize things, I envision the role of the president of the United States to be much like a commissioner in a sports league. And I'm a huge basketball fan. So Adam Silver is the gentleman that I um, admire because of what he's done for the NBA. But, anyways, the point of the commissioner is to ensure parity and competitive analysis, right? And fair practices. Right now, we have giant monopolies, right? And we're seeing that across markets. And the importance of keeping parity for innovation purposes. I've put focuses on healthcare for all. I've used the actual phrase freedom dividend because I think Andrew Yang did a fantastic job of reinforcing that idea into people's minds during his election cycle. So, coming from a business background, I wouldn't steer away from it. It would be like trying to change Twitter to X, right? You had this branding brilliance and it was already
Yeah.
in people's minds, and then you change directions. Well, that's silly. That's not nonsensical in my mind. So, freedom dividend is those are the two most important aspects that I think and I believe in because they increase the opportunity for competitive landscape if we're to believe that the free market is the direction that we continue to operate in here in the United States, right? Because healthcare in the United States is atrocious. We all know it. I've lived in Canada. I got to experience what it's like to live in a society where you have that peace of mind that comes with living with a social safety net. But freedom dividend or the universal basic income is equally as important because I'm a big proponent of startups. And the way that I envision this turning out to be in our country is to turn us into the world's largest incubator, right? Because if you've got the safety net of your healthcare taken care of, and you've got even just a basic minimum amount, you're more inclined to take risks to go find something that is fulfilling to you. And in that process, you're innovating. And in those innovations breeds competition. And that's why I think it's so important that those two specifically are implemented rather quickly. Plus, they also would help us bring back some of the debt that we're experiencing at record levels, right? Because we've got a lot of administrative costs, a lot of bloat in our system, and switching into something that is universal healthcare is going to help bring down those costs because we have the most expensive healthcare system in the world, and a giant majority of that is from administrative costs.
Speaking of healthcare, I was recently noticing that former President Trump has promised that if he is elected, he will repeal Obamacare and replace it with something that will be way better and cost much less. What would you want to do about healthcare? How would you change it?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, is this 2015? Because isn't that the exact same thing he said back then? Only it was, oh, I'll have it in 2 weeks' time. Well, how many 2 week cycles have there been since then? I'll rely on the nerds to give us that math. But yeah, ultimately, the way that I envision our country experiencing universal healthcare, um, you have to understand my leadership style. I don't like dictating. What I would do is I would put together something similar to Shark Tank, where there is public facing awareness of different policy directions we could go in terms of how this would be implemented. I let the American public decide what is the right direction for us as a country. But the foundation of my policy vision is healthcare as a right, because there are definitely different models that exist across the world. Well, guess what? Some examples may be right for our country. Some facets of other examples may be a better approach for a country of our diversity, a country of our size. Ultimately, having that specific answer is something I want to empower Americans to, one, grow in their understanding of how healthcare will work, so that way there's buy-in, and two, also feel like they were connected to this thing that will be producing value for them and their own experience all on this earth.
Great. I think any efforts possible to improve healthcare will yield benefits for so many people, and it's when you look at the numbers about how much we spend and the results we're getting, clearly something's not working.
Yeah, well, I use the example of GoFundMe, right? GoFundMe, especially with healthcare, that exists because there's a gap in the market. Well, the gap in the market is healthcare, and that's a huge problem. I have two examples in my life where I've lost my job because of major accidents and injuries that I've sustained. One was the car accident. I lost my job shortly after that, and therefore my healthcare. That whole experience was very eye-opening. One from the patient side and just the experience and interaction with the practitioners themselves, but also I had to pursue a lawsuit against my own insurance company because it was a hit and run. But part of that process was just taking in the checks and paying them out because I want to understand every aspect of this experience from the patient side that most people don't get the experience around. But then the other example was a more recent example where I was in a skiing accident and had to have surgery on both my knees. I ended up losing my job, lost my health care again because it was tied to my employment. This type of structure of having healthcare is just, it's not acceptable to me, especially when everybody experiences our healthcare system in some form or fashion.
Gabriel, you mentioned that you grew up in San Diego, so I'm curious, living in the southern part of the country, with in a border state, what is
Mhm.
your read on the current state of the border security and immigration? My sense is that obviously Trump was really, my opinion, kind of racist and dehumanizing of immigrants. I also feel like Biden was so eager to distance himself from Trump that maybe he didn't do as much to push on comprehensive immigration reform or pragmatic kind of border security. What's your take on immigration, going forward?
Well, sure. Just to compare those two, uh, policy-wise, not much has changed between them. So, in terms of what has changed, is just the rhetoric around talking about immigrants, right? But immigrants are used as a cudgel in our society, especially for uh, political advantages to raising money, right? Because this talking point has been in existence for the entirety of my life, and I'm 41 years old, right? If we haven't figured it out by now, is it really something that we're trying to solve? And that's why, again, I'm running, because I'm here to find solutions. But in my life, the other states I've lived in is Arizona. My family lived very close to a border town. My best friend's from a border town. I've got immigrants in my life, including my better half. She's currently deployed in the military, but she came from Russia. My stepdad himself came in legally. So I've got all of these examples in my life of understanding and relationships with immigrants, and the way that we are operating here in our country and dehumanizing them is separate from what is the pragmatic approach to solving the amount of people that are coming into our country. One, the border and providing a barrier, to me, is really nonsensical, because the issue itself isn't just that people are coming in, because the argument is that immigrants are coming in to take from you, right? And that's what Trump and the Republicans always use as a talking point. It's not that they're also poisoning the blood of our country, but they're also taking from you. And so that rhetoric doesn't help. But the solution around these things don't have to be about the immigrants themselves. And the argument that I use is immigrants, especially when they come in legally or illegally, have very little power, right? They come here to the United States, they seek resources or an opportunity for a job. Well, the employers themselves are the ones that are hiring these people, whether it's under the table or whatever type of arrangement is made. So something that I am a proponent of is having some sort of uh, way to track and approve those that are coming into the country through a system, right? E-Verify has been an example that Republicans use as a talking point. I think that's a way for us to hold accountable the corporations or the companies that are hiring people that are circumventing our legal process. The legal process, of course, is bogged down, so we need to deploy more resources towards expediting that process. So that way, the actual legal process doesn't become such a burden to entry for those that are coming here through illegal means. But of course, then you have to address those nations that we ourselves have contributed to causing instability and having these people that are leaving their countries, especially Latin America.
Yeah, I agree with you that certainly probably better enforcement of our employment laws to hold everyone accountable for the current kind of broken system, including employers, makes a ton of sense.
Hmm.
I also, it seems to me like the asylum process in general is just really maybe designed. I'd have to look it up, but it sounds like it was probably designed in a different era where I don't know if it had anticipated the volume of potential applicants that we're currently seeing and expect to receive because of the instability in other parts of the world. All of the kind of uh, challenges that people are facing in their home countries. What do you? What's your sense of like what is the right way to moderate and throttle the volume of immigration? Because like clearly there must be a point where the country can't sustainably intake as many as there might be people who want a better life here.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. So I guess one of these examples in my life, I helped the Red Cross during 2017 Hurricane Harvey relief effort establish a whole new division called the Latino Engagement Team. Okay, and that experience was very eye-opening in a lot of ways, right? Because uh, putting into perspective, resources are finite. Yes, our country as a whole is very large, and generally speaking, the resources here are much larger than a lot of people will care to think about, right? But they are still finite, and that does include uh, providing for people that are seeking refugee from whatever circumstances that they've experienced on their own, right? One thing that I think that we can do as a country, instead of just putting up barriers, because whether or not it's cost effective or efficient isn't as important as trying to bring stability to nations that we ourselves are contributing to destabilize, right? We've got Palestine and Israel as an example where people are being displaced, Ukraine and Russia. I've got people here from Russia who have come seeking asylum because of a war outbreak. It's one of these things that we can't control everything that happens in the world, right? But the ones and examples where we as a nation have really caused and contributed to those, we have to reflect on that in the mirror. But we have to also recognize as a country there are finite resources, and we're starting to see what happens when things like immigrants being shipped to various blue sanctuary states, they're starting to experience that in real time. I was just in Chicago recently, and the mayor was under scrutiny because the site and location where he originally wanted to host the incoming immigrants was contaminated. And the citizens of that area kept trying to tell him. And so there was a bunch of pushback, right? But everywhere I've been throughout this travel, I'm starting to see more and more tents pop up, right? And what ends up happening is if we're turning into this giant refugee site across our country, that's not sustainable, but it's also not pragmatic to think that we can just take everybody and every circumstance. But because we haven't solved the border legal process, because whether it be by design, we're going to continue to have this problem take place. And so until we do address these things, these inequities that are part of that process, we're going to continue to have people coming across however they can. And that's the unfortunate part. So part of this process is taking ownership as a country, and how can we reduce the frictions that we've also churned in these places. Israel is one example that I answered at the um, presidential forum, saying, look, our part in that process, even though we're supporting our allies, there's a difference between supporting our allies and keeping the peace, and then supporting our allies while they continue to bludgeon the area and effectively create more chaos than needs to be in order to provide safety back to its own citizens. Netanyahu would disagree with that statement, but that's the fact of the matter.
Yeah, it's amazing how polarized the country is on what we should do about Israel and Gaza. Definitely, Biden seems to be pretty, at least publicly, almost unconditionally in support of the Netanyahu kind of activities in Gaza. I personally feel troubled by the fact that the number of deaths seems so disproportionate to October
Yeah,
7th, which of course was a massive tragedy and terrible attack. And I think Israel had every right to respond. I also think there's like a limit to how many, how long and intense that response should be.
of
Um,
course.
I know the argument is, well, but Hamas is hiding underneath. I don't know. Like, if they're hiding underneath the hospital, then it's not obvious to me that you should blow up the hospital, because there's collateral damage, and then there's just indiscriminate bombing. Um,
Right, right.
but
Do you think that was by accident? I'm going to tell you right now. Like, if I'm using this argument, I've used this argument in other cases. There are times to use shotguns. There are times to use scalpels. Right. In this particular case, when we're talking about modern warfare in an urban environment, blowing everything up, especially using the size weaponry that we use, does not make sense unless you are trying to create a different outcome than you are projecting to the world, right? Because ultimately, if we were concerned about, and my argument was this on the presidential stage, was if I'm commander in chief, my top priority is getting the hostages back. You blowing up the buildings that they may be in is counterproductive to what our goal should be, right? We came here offering our military might to keep the peace while you try to retaliate and protect your own citizens. But now you've taken it to the point where, great, we have destabilized every part of Gaza, and you continue to blow things up, and that's why you keep seeing refugee camps getting hit, hundreds of people getting killed daily. At some point, you have to reflect that that is actually not in the interest of your country, definitely not in the interest of our country if you're doing it out of bloodthirst at this point.
what would your position be? What do you think the U.S. position should be, given that many of those bombs being dropped, might have come from the United States in terms of where they're produced or supplied?
Yes. Well, ultimately, here's where me as the citizen and the caring, compassionate person that I am, uh, we're complicit. Unfortunately, like this is where we're at. I come from a defense industry household, but there is a difference between defense and a difference between offense, right? Us being there present in that region of the world um, at this moment for safety purposes is completely different. But if we are also fueling this by providing weaponry, that makes us complicit. And I know, first and foremost, I care about humans in totality. And I'm very diplomatic in the way that I try to envision how we can come to a solution. I've never heard of battling it out as the best way to solve this, right? Because especially when you've got the Palestinians who don't have the armaments the way that the Israel government does. And at this point in this, I don't want to even call it conflict, but this power dynamic shift, what is to be gained other than to um, completely wipe out what Israel's government is saying is to completely wipe out Hamas by continuing to attack and blow things up, right? The surgical component of how this operation should have gone, yes, there would have been more casualties for the IDF, but in that process, you would have at least afforded yourself the opportunity to earn public support, where currently global public support is on the side of the Palestinians.
Yeah, I wonder how that would play in the Democratic primary. I I I, I look at the numbers, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
very much in agreement with you that there has to be some conditions on U.S. aid, additional U.S. military aid.
Yep.
According to some of and these aren't like hardcore. This is just Reuters. 40,000 buildings have been bombed. 20,000 deaths. Over 500 2,000-pound bombs have been dropped in a 140-mile square mile area.
Yeah.
And the U.S., we have not been the best actors for sure, but even in Iraq and Afghanistan, we did not drop that many 2,000-pound bombs. It was considered
No.
too indiscriminate.
Right. Well, like in Mosul, as an example, what would be the effect of that? Right. We're destroying the terrain, but we already knew, and it was well known, that there was going to be a network of tunnels. And so, if we operate with the understanding that the network of tunnels aren't going to be harmed, which we are finding the case
Yeah.
of these bombs, then what was the point of doing that? Is it because there's money interest? Is it because there's political interest in keeping your constituents, that being Netanyahu, pacified, that we are affording every opportunity to inflict harm on those that have harmed us, right? Because that's the perception that Netanyahu's wanting to project, right? He wants to project strength. So that means I got to use the biggest bombs.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to play devil's advocate, I don't hold this position, but perhaps they could argue that, hey, we need to show the world and show all our neighbors that if something like October 7th happens again, we'll just respond with 100 times, the force and level wherever the attack comes from. And so in a strange way that would defend the current response as a effort to preempt future attacks.
Yeah, this is the big stick argument, right? Show how big my stick is, so that way I can prevent future atrocities. But the truth of the matter is, the surrounding nations all have equally as effective armaments themselves. The Palestinians did not, right? So all this looks like, from my vantage, and I feel a lot of people, especially globally's vantage, is okay. At this point, this is kicking people while they're down, but and that's a light way of putting it. Really, we're killing thousands of children who had nothing to do with Hamas. And I understand the desire to prevent future attacks, but I think that when you start out from a foundation of this set of people were not living under a system where they could thrive. This is similar to like post World War I Germany, right? The reason why after World War II we implemented the Marshall Plan is because we wanted to bring a sense back to the Germans that there's going to be a future for you. And if you never have that opportunity going forward after this event has taken place, then there's constantly going to be conflict. And so whether or not you are demonstrating through your strength to prevent off other attacks, that's not really going to be effective, because these other nations are not the same military or lack of military strength that Hamas is. So it's not really fair to make that argument. It's like saying the bully's beating up the littlest person on the block. Well, yeah, okay, that's not a great example to warn off others who are actually just as capable as you are in that region. The best way to go about this is to show um, stability and bringing back the environment to a calm place. I apologize. I've got 3 dogs here.
All three of them. Yeah,
I do.
I'm a dog lover myself. I'm sure a lot of people watching this they've been in your shoes. So all good. I can hear you fine. Do you need to let them out of the room or something? Or
2 seconds. Let me chase them away. Yeah, unfortunately, pardon me. Just one. Come on.
Nothing like a live stream interview.
My apologies. Yeah, it's one of these things. My better half is currently deployed, as I mentioned. So ordinarily, it would be helpful to have somebody else to
All good.
manage the wild ones.
Gabriel, you talked about the presidential forum that you were at. Are there going to be other ones where all of the or many of the Democratic candidates are on the stage and can
Yeah, yesterday there was an announcement of a presidential debate, but it seemed to miss the invitation of every other presidential candidate other than Marianne and Dean Phillips, which seems to be very commonplace, where there are a set of presidential candidates named Cenk Uygur, Marianne Williamson, and Dean Phillips, who believe they're the only candidates in the race because they already have some name recognition, right? But that's really antithetical to my belief in how democracy should work, at least the voting process, where if you have something to say and you go through the parameters of meeting those expectations to get on the ballot, then great. Let's give this person an opportunity, because whether or not it resonates with somebody, that'll be for the voters to decide.
Yeah, that is interesting how it's a little bit like immigration, where once someone gets in the country, that many times they're not super keen on a lot more people coming in. And in this case, like, you could argue that the candidates feeling pushed out by Biden, once they get in the door to get a little more exposure, they really should argue for a more open access for the ones behind them.
Yeah, that's not the mentality. Like, even with, I know you mentioned that you're interested in Dean Phillips, but an example I thought that was kind of disappointing in his character was he was on CNN and he said he was the only candidate in the race. Well, clearly Marianne Williamson has been in the race much longer than he has. Whether or not you believe Cenk Uygur is in the race, that I only know of one ballot that he's on. So the court will decide whether or not he's actually in the race. But for those of us that have been on ballots across the country, to ignore us entirely is basically being the same as the DNC saying there are no other candidates, right? It's like a crab mentality, and unfortunately, that's not acceptable in my mind, because I've been working in tandem with other presidential candidates because we're trying to break through these barriers to entry, because ultimately we believe that somebody deserves to hear a different voice, because the overwhelming consensus across the country is people are looking for somebody not named Biden.
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I am supporting Phillips at the moment, and I expect to. I will say that
You're saying I haven't won you over yet.
No, I like you too, Gabriel. I like you too. I will say that when he says I'm the only one running, I think, and I'm being generous, maybe he really is purposely excluding other people. But I think what he means is I'm the only one in Congress who, like, elected federal official who's kind of putting their name out there. Because factually there are plenty of other people running for the primary. But
sure.
Who knows what he had in his mind? But he should be more clear about that, for sure.
Well, and so let me lay this on you then. So if you're not an effective communicator in that way, are you really ready for the job?
Well, no one's perfect. I would say,
Uh,
you know, we
I
shouldn't
agree. I agree.
we shouldn't
I'm
expect
just using it as a character
I hear you.
argument, playing devil's advocate if you
I
want,
hear you. I appreciate that,
because
Gabriel.
because
Look,
ultimately the free market of ideas should be open to everybody, right? And ultimately, if you are um, strong in your conviction and it resonates with the voters, great. The voters can dictate them.
yeah,
That's who they want as their champion.
yep. And so I hope that he cleans that messaging up because I think it creates a lot of unnecessary kind of negative energy
It
that
does.
could be avoided.
There.
One thing that you and I do for sure agree on
Mhm.
is, and I think maybe, and for sure, probably Phillips as well, is I think we all are very concerned about what would happen if Biden is a nominee in the general election, given how currently low his approval rating is and how weak of a campaigner he has been in the past. Um, you know, I really feel like a vote for Biden in the primary is kind of a vote for Trump in the general. I really am concerned about how Biden Harris will really hold up. I'm guessing
Yeah,
you have similar concerns.
I do. I do. So yeah, the you're seeing daily that he's losing support, right? Especially with things continuing to expand in Israel and Gaza, right? He's losing support in swing states. But my concern for Biden is he's got no message. He's never had any message. Build Back Better was his original message, and now it's let's finish the job or get the job done, right?
Mhm.
But he never articulates what that looks like. He never gives the American voters something to believe in. What's the roadmap? What does this look like? Ultimately, that component is losing him support because ultimately people are holding their nose as they vote for this guy because there's fear of Trump. My argument and the thing that I believe that I have the greatest advantage around compared to the other candidates is I've worked with my hands, I've worked with unions and labor. I understand having lived in all these places, I understand perspectives. Every place I've lived, people only care about the well being of their friends, their family, and their community. And given that I've been a job creator, I'm physically fit, right? I show that I care for my family. Guess who that resonates with? Right? That resonates with the conservative ideals, at least what they proclaimed, right? So anytime I approach people, especially on the right, it resonates with them. The argument that I make for myself, I hold a lot of, but I also understand the value of these positions, translate them so that those right. Every time I end up sitting, known a Democrat in their life or hasn't ever considered voting for a Democrat because the sound bites that are often spoken of aren't from a position or a framework that they are going to understand and value it from.
Yeah, speaking of the concerns that you and I share about Biden, let me just show some people on my channel have seen this already, but this is basically looking at previous presidents running for reelection and their approval rating in December prior to their election year. And basically, it shows that if your approval rating is, under 48, it's very tough for you to be reelected. So George H.W. lost, Trump lost, Biden's at 37. Some polls have him at 39. Um, but I think we are potentially at risk. I think everybody's so focused on Trump that they're forgetting how weak Biden is right now. And
Mm-hmm.
they'll, say what you want about the Trump plurality, but they are very hardcore and they will show up. And they're
Yeah, they're
highly,
fired up,
yeah,
of course, because Trump has framed himself as this victim, right? Well, look it, I'm taking all these hits for you, and the public court of opinion is where he's making his argument rather than getting on the debate stage. I'm here and they can do this to me. They could think about what they can do to you, right? And that message resonates with people that are already followers, but it also hardens them even more. And then even those that may not have been on his side entirely are starting to see what they perceive as this um, establishment coming for him, and that resonates in their own world because we've allowed our government to create this dynamic where the majority aren't being served. Then that relates to their own life, right? Because they voted for him in the first place because he pushed himself and projected that he was not a part of the establishment. Drain the swamp was his major pitch, right? Because he knew that the sentiment out in the country is that people don't like what is happening uh, under both parties as they exist today, so they're willing to gamble on him. And that message won him his first term, and now here he is pointing to the fact that he is under scrutiny for things that he should be scrutinized for, but he's leveraging that as any deity would, saying, "Well, only I can protect you. Only I can make these changes because I'm of such higher um, uh, value that I'm going to shed and protect you with my strength, and I'll take the hits for you." Right? And it's very disingenuous because it's all self-reflective rather than the people, but the people are looking for somebody who's going to change things for them, and they're willing to take a gamble on somebody who gave them a check uh, during the pandemic, or gave them some sort of benefit from their company because he gave them a tax cut, and those companies gave them a bonus check one time. And so ultimately, those people translated, well, that's because of Trump, where you contrast it against the Democratic approach, which is not trickle down economics. And for people to realize the benefits of that take much longer to actually realize, if at all, from the perception of the everyday person.
Yeah, the whole like they're coming after me because they want to go after you, and I'm the defender of the working man is just it's a very effective narrative for the Trump campaign. I don't agree with it, obviously, but
Yeah.
one other thing I think we only have a couple more minutes, so I'll wrap with this. Want to get your thoughts, just to kind of I think many of us believe that Biden is a weaker candidate. A lot of people think that, well, but the desire of the country not to have another 4 years of Trump will mean people will hold their nose and vote for Biden, like they did in 2020.
Yep.
I think with the possibility of third party candidates like No Labels or Joe Manchin or RFK Jr., or maybe people who are just not enthusiastic about Biden and they might go for Stein or West.
Mm-hmm.
If neither gets the 270 votes, which I know we've never had this before, but if they don't, it does go to the Congress, and then every state has one vote. And based on the 2020 election, Trump, he lost the popular vote, he lost the electoral college vote, but in terms of number of states, like he got North Dakota, South Dakota, those are worth as much as California and New York,
Right. Yep.
and so a weak Biden that either loses to Trump because Trump gets over 270, or the vote gets split and no one gets 270, basically still ends up with Trump being president again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's quite
it's hard.
concerning either way, right? Uh, like I said, I didn't intend to run for president of the United States, but I could see the writing on the wall. I could see in our country that this was going to be an existential moment in time, that if I didn't step up to even make these arguments, people can't consider arguments they've never heard of. So um, my contribution to this race is showing every facet of this from the grassroots perspective, but also uh, effectively making arguments that are digestible across the aisle, because I do believe that we are in a situation where, unfortunately, I think Biden's going to lose if he becomes the nominee for the Democratic Party. And if I didn't do anything to change that outcome, whatever that looks like, I wouldn't be okay with myself.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. And I applaud that, Gabriel. I think obviously anyone running for president is a long shot, and so I get that
Yeah.
you're a bit of a long shot candidate, but I also celebrate the fact that what I'm hearing is you see like an iceberg in the distance, and you're trying everything you can to say, hey, we got to
Yep.
turn to avoid this iceberg. And so,
Are you kidding me? Yeah, that's been the narrative of my life since 2011, right? So my first startup was an attempt to take on Amazon because I could see the writing on the wall. The future of our country was United States of America, brought to you by Amazon, and that's only being perpetuated, but it's also taking place in our political system. As long as these politicians are able to accept these legal bribes, the writing on the wall for our country and this iceberg is the demise of our country as a capitalistic society. And so the threat is real, especially with Trump looming. But ultimately, the fear of Trump and having Biden as our champion, that's probably the scariest prospect of how this could play out.
well, what a great way to end the interview. It looks like Sue Bowman, who is watching live, just donated to your campaign.
Thank you,
Um,
Sue. I really
yeah.
appreciate it.
Before we wrap, just how can people learn more about you, and how can they help you get your message out?
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So my campaign website is Gabriel or Gabe 2024.com. And part of the fun of this whole experience is I'm documenting everything, every single step of every single state of every single conversation. It's all being presented on social media. So whether you're on Twitter is now something I'm taking full advantage of to share this information, but TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and the like, because part of this effort is to bring clarity to this process. Whether or not you believe in my message, hopefully you will gain the wisdom from my successes and failures. So that way there's a better understanding of how things are actually playing out. And if the message of renovating America resonates with you, I would greatly appreciate your support. Either donate time or money. We can use both because this isn't a one-man show, unlike Trump. It's something that we got to do collectively together. So thank you so much.
I love it. Oh, we did get one question from a channel member, very loyal
Yeah.
audience member, Jeremy. Wants to know, what former U.S. president would you compare yourself to?
Oh, that's a very good question. I guess the way that I would envision, and I would have to reference this. I believe that I'm very long-winded and use analogies when I speak about things, similar to Abraham Lincoln, at least from my understanding of how he would speak to people. Something that I find that's very valuable towards common understanding is using reference points that relate to anybody. And I use this example, and I'll make it quick. A friend of mine used an example of Jackson Pollock, an artist, and in his argument, most people didn't know who he was. And I used the exact same argument, but I used the movie The Matrix because it was more ubiquitous, and because I wanted to make sure people understood the message using something that relates to their life. And from my understanding, Abraham Lincoln liked to use different talking styles of that ilk to get his points across.
Well, he was one of the greats for sure. Actually, that might be something that we all, even Trump, would agree that Lincoln was a great president.
Well,
So
I've got the facial hair going, so I'm a proponent. I'm gonna keep sticking with that. I just need to invest in the hat, and I think we're working on it.
I love it, Gabriel. Well, thank you so much for joining, and best of luck to you on the trail. And I really hope you can help increase competition and give Democratic Party voters more choice, because
Yeah,
whoever
yeah.
they pick is going to have their hands full come November.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and honestly, I want to give a special thanks to Andrew Yang for running previously. I know that your whole channel and your organization exists because of his
Yeah.
example. And of course, I'm a firm believer in the freedom dividend, and so I want to make sure that I pay homage to his efforts, and especially bringing more awareness to UBI, the pending artificial intelligence revolution is coming, and of course, I'm a big proponent of his efforts to try to mitigate that through freedom dividend. So thank you so much to you, and thank you as well to Andrew Yang.
All right. Well, Gabriel Cornejo, good luck to you, sir. And hopefully we'll have another conversation with you in the future.
All right. See you later,
right.
nerds.
Bye, nerds. All right. What a cool conversation. There's always people that are running for president and you're like, well, I don't know how that's going to go. But given how I always love talking policy and getting to know people, Gabriel had reached out a couple times and I said, yeah, let's do it. And I'm glad we did. So hopefully you all found that useful. I'm going to share with you a couple other, I want to kind of expand on this notion of what happens if they don't hit 270 electoral votes in November, because it's quite interesting how the rules of the Constitution are written in that scenario. But before I do that, let me thank the channel members who basically keep this channel running and help me kind of know that this content is useful to you all. So we're going to start with our biggest supporter, which is Soldier One. And if any of you are thinking about, and you're like, hey, I want more of this Nerds for Humanity stuff, click the join button on YouTube. And it's like starts at $1.99 a month. Soldier One has been supporting the channel for 44 months, and he is currently a senior vice president. Next level is our vice president, the executive branch of Nerds for Humanity. We've got Kristen Slevin and Bike. Thank you, Kristen and Bike. And then we have our middle class, the hardcore nerds. We've got Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, and Ukiyu. So thank you to all of you. And then at our verified level, which is our entry level, only costs $1.99 a month, starting at our oldest verified nerd, Lisa, then Brandon, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Shoni, Dr. William, Karen, Mai, Brittany, Lori, Juana, Kevin, Hope, T, Jeremy. I think Jeremy was in the Jeremy asked the question. Hey, Jeremy. David, Nicholas, Mike, Zig, Roberto, Jackson, Lantern, Cindy, and Alice. So thanks to all of you for supporting the channel. Now, let me show you this doomsday scenario, because it came up on my Twitter. If you want to follow me, nerds_humanity, let me show you what kind of craziness would happen. Okay, here it is. So let me share my screen. Is it here? Oh, here. Okay. I think it's here. So I tweeted out like, hey, here's a scenario. If no candidate gets 270 electoral votes in November, the president is selected by the House of Representatives, with each state having one vote, irrespective of population. So California, New York, Texas, Florida, those entire states would have the same weight as Wyoming, Vermont, Delaware, South Dakota, which is, I would argue, not super fair, but it is how it's written. And if you look here at this visualization of the 2020 results, you see that, yes, Biden did win California, but in this scenario, California would have the same input as South Dakota or Wyoming. Yes, Biden won New York, but North Dakota or Oklahoma would have the same input. And when you look at the number of states that Trump won, yes, he lost a popular vote. He lost the electoral college vote, but he did win in terms of absolute number of states. When you count every state like Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, Alabama, the same weight as Washington State, California, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Pennsylvania, then you would actually have a likely House of Representatives saying, "Yeah, we're gonna pick Trump as our next president," since no one came up with 270. So this all underscores how important it is to get a Democratic nominee that can get to 270. I know a lot of Democrats feel like that's Joe Biden. I don't know, man. Guy's not popular, doesn't campaign well. His running mates like not super strong. We've got still a lot of pain on inflation. We have a border crisis. I think we're going to have 2.5 million migrant encounters this year. Like, there's a limit to how much any country can absorb. And the whole asylum process is just so broken. Like, you can claim asylum, they'll give you a court date years from now, and then review your asylum application if you voluntarily show up for your court date, which 90% of those, I think, applications are rejected. So, people acting rationally would just apply for asylum and then probably not even show up because they know there's a 90% chance their application will be denied. So the whole system is kind of weird. Like, okay, yeah, you can apply for asylum, wait in the country while your asylum process is being reviewed, and voluntarily show up a few years from now. Like, just seems kind of nutty. Jonathan's asking, Tom, where's that graph from? That was from the New York Times summary of the 2020 election. Let me see if I can give you like a specific answer. Yeah, so if you go to, let me just show you. So I'm at NewYorkTimes.com, presidential election results. And then I think I went to electoral votes view. So this is like square miles view. This is electoral votes view. And this is size of lead view. So you see how the Trump support is like spread out in maybe less populated areas. And then you've got Biden really doing well in more concentrated population areas. And then this is the view shift from 2016. Some parts of the country became more Republican, and then a lot of parts went the blue arrow way. So, yeah, but if we don't have a nominee that can get to 270, now you might be saying like, well, why would it be so hard to get to 270? I mean, he did get to 306. But let's say he had lost Pennsylvania, then he would have been down to 286. And then if he had lost Michigan, he would have been down to 270 exactly. And then if he had lost Wisconsin, he would have been down to 260. So, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you see a path where, like, let's say people stay home, independents stay home. They don't turn out the way that they normally would, but then the MAGA people, like, turn out strong. Like, it's not hard to see a path where you're like, oh, shoot. Or here's the thing about 2024. What if RFK Jr., influences like Michigan? Or what if RFK Jr. influences Georgia? Or what if, you know, Joe Manchin runs as a no labels candidate? You can have no one getting the 270. Like, it's not necessarily that if Biden doesn't win those states, Trump will necessarily get those votes. Like, who knows? Like, some third party candidate gets just takes away enough votes for either Trump to get them or for neither Biden or Trump to get to 270. And then it's automatic Trump win because of the way the rules are. Every small state that went red is going to have the same amount of input as, New York and Washington State and California, Pennsylvania. Like, that's the way the rules are written currently. So anyway, hopefully this was useful to you. If you can't become a member and you want to help out the channel, please consider liking and sharing just so we can grow the audience. And let me know in the comments what you like or dislike about Gabriel. And by the way, if you do want to learn more about Gabriel or want to increase awareness for him, if you go to ofthepeople.us, you'll see that he's listed here, and you can click on the green approve button and you can be the first to write a review of him as well. So, I'll just show you guys how that's done. Let me log in. I'm going to click the login button and then I'm going to go here. Hey, Sue, Happy New Year to you as well. I'm very jealous. I hope you live in a part of Portugal where you can get those egg custard things. I was in Portugal many years ago and I found those delicious, and they rang a bell when it was hot and ready, and I had an espresso with it. It was amazing. But here you go. So let's say, well, if we wanted to, we could approve or vote Gabriel. Why don't we do that? I mean, that's the beauty of approval voting. Even though I'm supporting Dean Phillips, I can vote for more than one person. So I'm going to approve or vote Gabriel, and then I'm going to write a review here. Gabriel comes across as thoughtful, calm, patriotic, and methodical. Kudos for throwing his hat in the ring. I would prefer. It's a free country. I can say what I want for Phillips. Oh, wait a minute. I think it's 2 L's. Yeah. Prefer Phillips, but love Gabriel's chutzpah and would hope his voice and ideas are heard and considered, especially the freedom dividend and his balanced approach on Israel, Gaza. Then you say submit, and boom, it's like Yelp for political candidates. So go check out ofthepeople.us. And with that, I'll say goodbye, nerds.